This lecture is about the self. Now, you might be wondering why a lecture about the self is part of a course on interpersonal relationships or improving your relationships. Well, I can tell you that because how you feel about yourself and how you value yourself, your own self-identity, all of this influences to a great extent how you interact with other people. So it's worthwhile to take a look at aspects of the self so that you can have a greater sense for where you might be able to make some improvements. So the first concept in this lecture is the idea of a self-concept, and that simply is our identity. This is different from self-esteem, okay? We'll talk about that in a minute. The self-concept is about your identity. What do you say when someone asks you, who are you? Which words would you use to describe yourselves, and which answer would be most important? The answer that you might give is an indication of your self-concept. Our ideas about who we are do not change with our moods. They're relatively stable and enduring over time. Sometimes our self-perceptions are unreasonably positive. I'm sure that you all know people like that who have unrealistic perceptions about their attributes and their abilities. Maybe you know someone who is a street fighter who thinks he's good enough to take on a world champion fighter in a street fight, and guess who loses? Some people, on the other hand, have judgments of themselves as unreasonably negative. I'm sure that we all know people who are actually truly talented who have little confidence in their abilities, or the people who constantly feel the need to prove themselves well beyond others' satisfaction. Low self-concepts are connected to self-esteem, they're related, and people who hold low self-concepts often tend to respond to constructive criticism or disagreement with very harsh self-criticism. This is a reflection of how you feel about yourself, who you think you are. A self-concept doesn't develop overnight, but rather it develops slowly over the entire course of a person's lifetime. And it's a function of a person's biological makeup, where and how a person was raised, and that person's social environment. A lot goes into constructing the self-concept. A lot of research has indicated that once a self-concept is developed, we tend to seek the company of other people who will confirm that self-concept of us. So if you find yourself with a positive self-concept, you tend to seek the company of those who hold a positive impression of you. And if you have a negative self-concept, you might tend to seek the company of those who hold a negative impression of you. This reinforces our self-concept, and it also makes our self-concept even more resistant to change, because everyone in our world is reinforcing our ideas of who we are as ourselves. It's not impossible to change a self-concept. They do change, or they can change in response to development and significant life events. When a person works his or her way all the way up the social ladder and becomes an expert in his or her field, even if that person had a low self-concept before, they would probably have a stronger self-concept when they're sitting at the top of their field. Healthy self-concepts are flexible, and they're subject to change as life circumstances evolve. They can change over a person's lifetime, but they don't always. If a person has a negative self-concept, extensive therapy can help improve that. But in general, most people's self-concepts don't really change over the course of their lives. The idea of reflected appraisal is an important part of the idea of self-concept, and this suggests that our self-concept develops as a reflection of what we think other people think of us. Maybe we have a teacher or another role model that has influenced us significantly and helped us build up our self-concept. Or maybe we are led to believe that we're inferior, irrelevant, or always wrong, or a waste of space. And there are many people who unfortunately have this. These are not innocuous assessments. If I'm in an environment as a child where I am treated as if I am inferior, irrelevant, and unnecessary, I'm going to develop a self-concept that with those same characteristics. And I'm going to seek the company of people who also view me in that way, which makes it even harder for me to come out of that mindset. The impressions of these significant others on us matter a great deal. They matter very deeply to the development of our self-concept. Our quality of life is determined by our self-concept. If I have a low self-concept, I'm not going to reach very high because I don't feel that I'm capable of doing many great things. So the influences of these significant others on our development and on our self-concept is crucial in helping us or keeping us, holding us back from becoming all that we can be. Satisfaction with yourself is the idea behind self-esteem. It's not perceptions of yourself. Who you think you are is self-concept. Your level of satisfaction with who you are is your self-esteem. This is the value that you place on yourself. It's your assessment of your self-image as positive or negative. People with a high self-esteem tend to be more outgoing and willing to communicate, and they tend to try harder to accomplish a task a second time, even after they failed at it the first time. They're more comfortable initiating relationships and more likely to believe that expressions of love and kindness from relational partners are genuine, they're intended. Also, when people with a high self-esteem have relationship problems, they're more likely to end the relationship and seek out new ones rather than stay in the bad relationship. They're also believed to perform better academically and professionally and to have lower stress levels. On the other hand, people with low self-esteem tend to be more aggressive toward others, tend more toward substance abuse, and tend to become sexually active at an earlier age than those with a more positive self-image. Low self-esteem is also often blamed for criminal and antisocial behaviors. Those with high self-esteem are generally happier with their lives than those with low self-esteem. Self-esteem is more dynamic and changeable than a self-concept. It can change with your moods. Your self-esteem can change in response to a certain compliment or a certain quality performance or a certain poor performance or a certain insult. Your self-esteem can change. That is your satisfaction with yourself. Poor self-esteem can hold us back from achieving our full potential simply because we don't believe in ourselves enough to be able to reach high and to be able to achieve all that we might be capable of. Self-esteem isn't only about us. It also affects our communications with others, and this is backed by research. All humans have the need for control, the need for inclusion, and the need for affection. Self-esteem moderates or influences these needs of all humans. People with a lower self-esteem might have stronger needs for control, needs for inclusion, and needs for affection than someone with a higher self-esteem. Our need for control motivates us to achieve high and maintain some level of influence in our relationships. We need to have some say in what happens in our lives. That's our need for control. When we feel that we have no control, we're less satisfied with those relationships. People with higher self-esteem tend to feel more in control of their lives. The need for inclusion is our need to belong. We need to feel that we belong. We need to be included in other people's activities and to have positive human contact. When this need for inclusion isn't met, people can experience emotional and physical distress. People with higher self-esteem tend to be more outgoing, so they may be more motivated to seek out relationships that fulfill their need for inclusion. For example, they might be more willing to join groups or clubs or sports teams in efforts to meet other people. This is not to say that people don't need their downtime, because even though we all have a need for inclusion, we also all have a need for space sometimes. Each of us also has a need for affection. We need to have people in our lives who love us and who appreciate us and who express their affection toward us. We need to be able to give love and intimacy to others. Research has shown that the more affection people give and receive, the healthier and happier they are. People with higher self-esteem tend to be more expressive of affection than those with lower self-esteem. So these three needs, control, inclusion, and affection, are fundamental and necessary for all human beings. We all have all of these needs, though we might have them to different degrees. In talking about improving our relationships, ask yourself if you are respecting the other person's basic needs, their need for control, their need for inclusion, and their need for affection. Ask yourself if you are able to meet this person's needs in these areas. Also ask if your own needs are being met in each of these areas, your need for control, your need for inclusion, and your need for affection. If your needs are not being met in any one of these areas, you should probably speak up. You should probably do something or say something to make some adjustments to let the other person know that your needs are not being met. And these needs are not abnormal. These are basic, fundamental human needs that every single person on this planet has. So if you feel that your relational partner ignores you by not inviting you places, that's legitimate. Your need for inclusion is not being met. That's a legitimate concern and self-respectful to speak up and try and do something about that. On the other hand, if you are the culprit here and it's you that's not respecting someone else's needs in these areas, then you should be aware of that. Ask yourself if you are respecting this person's needs. If you're not, these are not very difficult things to keep in mind, most likely, when you're interacting with your relational partners. And if you're not doing this and you start doing this, there's a good chance your relationship will improve.